The first thing Lillian heard after opening her eyes was the sound of the wind hitting the palace windows as if trying to force its way in. This was not unusual in Altheria, but what was strange this time was that the wind carried neither the cold of winter nor the warmth of summer. Instead, it carried an emptiness, a feeling of void, as if the world had forgotten itself. She rose slowly, placing her hand on her chest, feeling the pulse of the ancient fire. It did not burn her, but it reminded her at every moment that things would never be the same again. In the palace corridors, footsteps were few, and the servants moved in silence, not out of fear of her, but of what they did not understand. Since her return from the Black Mountains, Lillian was no longer just a princess. She had become a symbol, and symbols inspire more fear than kings. They looked at her as if awaiting another miracle, but she knew the harsh truth. Miracles do not last, and only consciousness remains. In the council chamber, the council of elders was gathered. Their faces aged more than they should have in a few days. Talk began of rebuilding the kingdom, of laws, of re-establishing order, and they looked at Lillian whenever the ancient fire was mentioned. Some wanted to use it, and some feared it, but she saw something more dangerous in their eyes than greed and fear. She saw the desire to relinquish responsibility, to rely on an external force instead of confronting themselves. She left the chamber before the discussion ended, not in escape, but in silent refusal. In the palace gardens, where the trees were slowly regaining their color, she met Edric for the first time since her return. He was taller than she remembered, his shoulders slightly stooped, as if loss had weighed down his bones. He tried to thank her, but she stopped him with a single look, for she had not done what she did to be thanked, but because silence was no longer an option. He told her that people in distant villages did not feel the curse had ended, that some still saw dark dreams, and that trade routes still occasionally disappeared as if the earth was swallowing them. When she heard this, she knew her visions were not illusions, and that the name Phalar was not just an ancient memory. That night, Lillian had a dream she had never experienced before. It was neither a symbol nor a vision, but a memory. She saw the first world, before kingdoms, before crowns. She saw humans who tried to seize time, to achieve immortality, and thus created the idea of Phalor, the idea that the world could be governed without weakness, without sorrow, without chaos. But she also saw how that idea transformed into a prison, and how Ignar himself was part of that balance, not a jailer, but a guardian. She awoke at dawn and decided to depart without announcement. This time, she carried an incomplete ancient map, which said that the ruins of Valinor were not the end, but the beginning, and that beneath them lay a path opened only to those who understood that evil is not a creature to be killed, but an idea to be dismantled. Edric joined her without hesitation, then Myra, who felt movement in the stone before feet moved, and Caliph, who said that the blind see the future better than the sighted when fog descends. There was no promise of salvation among them, no oath, just a silent understanding that retreating meant others would pay the price. The path was longer than they expected. It did not just traverse geography, but memory. They passed through the ruins of untold stories, cities erased because they chose ease, and castles that collapsed because they feared change. One night, Edric disappeared among the shadows, and when he returned, he was more silent than usual, but his eyes carried a new fear, a fear of himself, because in the shadow he had seen a version of himself ruling with power, without mercy, and winning. As they drew closer to Valinor, Phalor's presence intensified, not as a sound, but as an allure, an idea whispering to each of them what they wished to hear. Myra saw a world without chaos, Caliph saw boundless knowledge, and Edric saw his family returned. As for Lillian, she saw a world that did not need her, an orderly, quiet world, without war, without screaming, a world alluring to the point of terror. It was only then that she understood the complete truth. Phalor does not destroy by force, but by promise. No one said anything after they realized that Phalor was not an enemy that could be stabbed or escaped, but an idea that infiltrated like breath, promising what you desired, and only asking you to relinquish a part of your humanity in return. The small caravan continued its journey towards the heart of Valinor's ruins, and each step weighed more heavily on their chests, for the silence was no longer comforting. It became filled with questions no one had the courage to ask. On the night before arrival, dreams were fractured. None of them slept truly. Myra spoke in her sleep in the language of stone. Caliph cried silently without knowing why, and Edric remained seated, staring into the darkness as if someone sat before him whom others could not see. Lillian felt the ancient fire stir uneasily, as if preparing for a confrontation different from all previous ones, a confrontation not won by sword or overt courage. At a pale sunrise, Valinor appeared, a city half existent, half forgotten, with broken columns floating in the air, paths leading nowhere, and a heavy silence as if time had paused in respect for an ancient mistake. The ruins were not deserted, they were waiting, and everyone who entered felt as if the city breathed through them. In the heart of Valinor, the space opened, not a gate nor a wall, but an idea taking form. Phalor appeared, not as a monster nor as a shadow, but as a voice bearing familiar features for each of them, a warm, reassuring voice that knew where to touch their weakness. It addressed them individually without speaking verbally, promising Myra a stable, unchanging world where the chaos she feared would cease, promising Caliph complete knowledge untainted by anything, promising Edric a life where those he lost would return without pain, without apparent cost. Then it turned to Lillian. It did not offer her power, nor a crown, nor immortality, but offered her rest. It offered her to stop fighting, to let the world be run by a strict, calm order, without wars, without tears, without human errors. It offered her a perfect world. For a brief moment, Lillian almost embraced that offer, for the weariness was real, and the burden was heavy, and the world never seemed grateful. But one thing saved her. She remembered her first step outside the palace, her first fear, her first decision without guarantee. She remembered that beauty was never in perfection, but in the ability to choose despite the pain. She raised her head and said in a voice that was not loud, but as honest as it had ever been, that a world run without freedom is not a living world, and that pain is not a flaw, but proof that we feel. Valinor trembled. In that moment, something broke within Edric. He fell to his knees, for his vision returned. But this time he saw the complete truth. He saw his family return without warmth, without soul, without choice, merely beautiful, empty images. So he cried out, not in fear, but in rejection. He took a step towards Lillian, then another, then stood beside her, and Myra followed him, then Caliph. Each of them lost the offer they wished for, but regained themselves anew. Phalor did not get angry, did not scream, but began to fade, because an idea only lives if someone believes in it. And with its disappearance, Valinor began to collapse, not with an explosion, but with liberation, as if the city itself had been waiting for centuries for someone to say no. When they returned to Altheria, they did not return as heroes. They returned tired, changed, different. But something was clear in the faces of the people. They no longer waited for a miracle from Lillian. Instead, they began to move, to cooperate, to make mistakes, and to try again. Lillian did not sit on the throne, nor did she abolish it. She left it as a symbolic place, not an absolute ruler, but a voice that reminds, teaching people that legends are beautiful, but they do not build alone, and that the ancient fire is not a gift, but a moral responsibility, and that awakening is a continuous process, not a single moment. On a quiet night, Lillian stood at the borders of the Black Mountains. She felt Ignar breathing deep within the earth. He was not entirely asleep this time, nor fully awake, but rather confident. She smiled, for she finally understood. The world does not need an awakened dragon, nor a saving princess, but humans who refuse to sleep when waking is harder. Thus ended the tale of Princess Lillian, not as the end of a legend, but as the beginning of a new era, an era where stories are written by the hands of those who live them, not those who await them.